This film came out in 1954 and it was directed by Akira Kurosawa. Together he co-wrote this screenplay with Shinobu Hashimoto and Hideo Oguni. It stars Takashi Shimura, who plays Kanbei. He's the veteran wise samurai who gathers and leads this group of ronin to help protect the villagers. Isao Kimura, who plays Katsushiro, who is the youngest of the bunch and was born into the samurai lineage. Lastly, but not least, Toshiro Mifune, who plays Kikuchiyo, the outlier who by the end fulfills his honor. An experienced lone samurai must round up 6 other ronin to join forces and protect feeble peasants against the ongoing raids by 40 ruthless bandits. Their payment? Not for money, nor for respect, but for their self-proclaimed duty and honor. So Alex and I watched this film together. For me, it was the first time. In this film, there are 3 groups of people. You have the villagers, you have the bandits, and then you have the samurai. They all have one goal, basically, to survive. How do their dynamics and roles reflect the social construct of that time?
The simple premise works so great because of exactly what you said. It's about these 3 different groups of people who have conflicting ideals and motivations, and how those interactions reflect a much more complicated conflict.
We understand the bandits are attacking these villagers, taking their food, and the villagers are fed up and they need help. They can't defend themselves. What makes it interesting is not that story, it's the dynamic between the samurai and the villagers. And I love that this film goes into detail of developing these samurai characters through this journey of helping the peasants through the first story.
As I understand, this film is taking place in the Sengoku period of Japan.
Sengoku period.
Samurai weren't always looked at as what we think of them today as very cool
honorable men.
And honorable. They were kind of arrogant, pompous
Sleep
warriors.
with your woman.
Yes. And the villagers themselves aren't that admirable either because they're just poor peasants. And defenseless and desperate even for the help of samurai. The villagers aren't all that innocent. You know, they're guilty of hiding and mistrust and stealing and murder even. But I think the best representation of that conflict of the 2 sides is represented in one character, the character of Kikuchiyo, who is kind of a muddled mix of both. He, in the beginning, comes off as that arrogant samurai type that the villagers may fear. Yet it's Kikuchiyo's big heart that really is the unification, the glue of this group defending the villagers, is what it felt like.
He definitely stood out to me as a performer on screen, just because he was very physical with his movements. Moments, especially there's a scene where he's drunk, plays that very well. Almost reminds me of Johnny Depp in Pirates of the Caribbean. And so it makes you think that this actor inspired other actors later on to involve more or include more physical movements, because it really does show on screen and it really attracts you to that character.
Yeah, he was definitely the standout for his performance, but just also he was the most fleshed out.
I also think I think he does a good job between swings. And when I say swings, like working from being extremely emotional and then going completely opposite on that spectrum to being like very happy, energetic, and just what's the word you used?
Rambunctious.
And so I just loved that constant swing in his character because it just made it so much more interesting.
Seven Samurai may not be inherently a war film. It does have that aspect of there's oppositions that are trying to take over a lesser group of people. In both films, again, there is no victory to be had. Even when the bandits are defeated, it comes at a cost.
So Akira Kurosawa was largely recognized for impacting the cinema world, both in Japan and internationally. At this time, when this film came out, this was very unique in Japan.
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Yes, it's interesting because, he made films prior to this, but it was in around this time in the 50s when he very much engaged with Western audiences. Other directors from Japan, like
Nagisa Oshima,
were quoted in stating that they thought that Kurosawa was catering to Western audiences, specifically their traditions, and he was kind of turning his back on
traditional Japanese style films.
And Kurosawa, very frankly, disagreed with this. He said he was trying to cater to the younger audiences, and that's why he was making the cinematography and the action more kind of compelling and faster paced and dynamic. I want to say
Because they were gravitated towards the Western films at the time.
yes, Western audiences and younger audiences of even Japan. And he even asked the composer of the film, who will insert his name, to add music that's not typical or even traditional Japanese music. He thought that wasn't turning his back on Japanese culture. It was just engaging.
Which I think, for that reason, this film became internationally well known.
Seven Samurai had a huge impact and influence on George Lucas, who we know went on to make Star Wars.
It's hard to really appreciate the true genius of Kurosawa. I tell you, I've seen a few of the films. My favorite of all time is really Seven Samurai. It's really his visual style to me that is so strong and unique, and a very, very powerful element in how he tells his stories. I think he comes from a generation of filmmakers that were still influenced by silent films, something that I've been very interested in, having come out of film school.
Obviously, a few years after this one, there was a remake, The Magnificent Seven, by director John Sturges, 1960. And I grew up with that film, actually. I saw it dozens of times before I ever saw Seven Samurai. And I loved it. And
I've never seen it.
It has Charles Bronson in it, Steve McQueen. Big actors, very compelling, charismatic actors, badass. And it's the same story, almost identical characters. But I noticed that Seven Samurai does a far greater job in fleshing out the characters and giving more depth and more complex conflicts between the peasants and the samurai, as opposed to the villagers and the cowboys or the bounty hunters that are in Magnificent Seven. Maybe that's due to the extra runtime that the film gets, but I feel like there's more depth generally in Seven Samurai. Both are very fun to put on, but Magnificent Seven is a little more lighthearted, I'd say.
Yeah, I really like how Seven Samurai, I find this director, he had organized the story and constructed the whole film so well. And I could see that being an inspiration to other filmmakers in creating that rhythm throughout the film.
It is that rhythm which it's in the dialogue, but it's also in the cinematography, the use of nature and the weather. There's shots where the wind is going along with the motion of a dozen characters, where Japanese films before were much more tame, as I understand.
I want to shout out to
Japan
and the Japanese people, because I find them very, very focused on detail, and I think that makes a huge difference. It's like one of my beliefs is like, if you pay attention to like really finding the details, you create a masterpiece. And I think
that's
Japanese,
all over this film.
And yeah, this guy Akira Kurosawa does an amazing job in this film doing that. And I think I like to say most Japanese people are like that. They're very good with paying attention to detail.
Oh yeah, that's why they tend to be they're more considerate and aware people than
Definitely.
many I've come to know.
So shout out to Japanese people.
Yeah. It is no secret that this is considered one of the greatest epics of all time.
Not only does it carry those heavy themes, but I love that the director was able to put some comedic choices in there. So you can enjoy it as like a family, you know, because there are some funny moments. You laugh and you cry. It's a great movie for that.
Yeah, even though it takes place more or less in this village, it does feel like a kind of an adventure film with obstacles they need to overcome between each other and then the physical conflict of the bandits. And I think it makes it very compelling and fun to watch. And as well as the comedy that's sprinkled in it is just like a cherry on top.
Cherry on top. It's also unique. You don't see a lot of Japan history in like internationally well-known films. So it's cool to see that. 1962's Harakiri, directed by Masaki Kobayashi, is set during the Edo period and the rule of Tokugawa shogunate. We follow a ronin named Hanshiro Tsugumo, played by Tatsuya Nakadai, who arrives at the estate of Lee, requesting to commit seppuku, and using the opportunity to explain the events that drove him to death before an audience of samurai.
This movie, along with Seven Samurai, I think are perfect films where it takes you on this journey that subverts your expectations constantly. 30 minutes into it, you're like, this should be the finale.
No, exactly.
And then it just turns it 180. The cinematography, for its time, so modern, decades ahead of its time. Similar to Seven Samurai, we see the influence it's had on other films we've loved, from westerns to modern action revenge thrillers. It's really the grandfather, and it's so interesting for the backdrop to be the Japanese culture, something so rich and old with the roots so deep. And it adds to the gravity of the whole situation of this one particular Ronin story that we're following.
The first question I have is Harakiri being known now as an anti-samurai film because of how, like what you said, it subverts your expectations of what you expect of a samurai, you know, idolizing the samurai for the warriorness of it. This film doesn't portray that. It's an anti-samurai film. So I just wonder how it's possible for this film to be arguably one of the best samurai films in cinema history.
A lot of audiences, Western audiences especially, will go into a film like this expecting the badassery of the samurai.
Sorry, just to note, especially with the ritual of seppuku, right? And doing harakiri, right? Is initially why people would approach this film just based on the title.
I'm guilty of that.
Exactly.
I was I know what that is, and it's all based in samurai code and honor and honorable death. Yet, it kind of throws that back at you. You get everything you expect and want, knowing what a Westerner knows of samurai in this film. Those things happen right from the duel, the rituals. However, how it unfolds is what's very interesting. It's a more intimate story following this Ronin. It immediately captivates you by his purpose of entering this clan's home and requesting to have this ritual. Immediately it's established that at this time in Japan, there's peace throughout. Yet, for the samurai, who are now masterless, also known as Ronin, they're essentially wanderers, they're jobless. The time of peace for them is their struggle. What some of these Ronin would do is present themselves to these estates and request harakiri, but really not intend for that.
Right, expecting
to be charited money. Immediately that flips this whole code of honor that the samurai have on its head, and it's a con essentially that they're doing. The film again, it establishes that the estates have caught on to this con.
And the film does that by using the story of Motome Chijiwa, the
son-in-law
of
the
the main
protagonist.
character Tsugumo.
As the story unravels and you get deeper and deeper into the motivation of the protagonist and what brought him there, all these rituals of the samurai, including the harakiri, you see in a complete new perspective. Yet the film continues to be engaging because you're figuring out the protagonist's motivations
Right.
all the way up until the end. So for instance, the film opens with showing establishing shots of the interior of this estate where the protagonist is gonna bring himself to. And we see the red armor. It's kind of the centerpiece that the clan worships.
My initial reaction of it, I think, with the smoke, it had
There
some
was a
kind of like smoke
effect, yeah.
effect in it.
Very dramatic.
It was dramatic.
Establishing
It
shot.
was intimidating. To me, it reminded me of the Oni, which is a Japanese devil monster. And I feel like that for that purpose, it was meant to be intimidating.
Whether you're Japanese or not, you go into this film with an expectation of what you believe to know as the samurai code, the honor, the discipline, the armor that you see in the establishing shots of the film present that intimidation and respect. Mm-hmm. In the end, that too gets completely subverted. And it goes to show you through this individual's journey, code of honor amongst an individual has virtue, but code of honor amongst a group, a clan, or a gang, a community can lead to complete madness. For a group to uphold values can completely go against someone's individual path.
I mean, it's exactly what happens to the main character in the film.
It's very
Tsugumo,
tragic.
when he is all of a sudden faced with two codes, basically, the code of the samurai and the code of his family. And that's shown in the scene, I think one of the most beautiful, captivating scenes in the film was when we learned that Chijiwa, the son-in-law of the main character, sells his sword, his samurai sword, in the pawn shop for money to be able to save his family.
Even after learning of this new concept of Ronin conning these estates for money, even that weak act can be explained, and for good reason, but they didn't give him a chance. And how often do we see that but not really understand what's going on in life, where a person doesn't have the chance to explain themselves, mm-hmm. and people assume, and then you have the gang mentality, the mob mentality, just trap him. So it's very tragic, and it's very true to any human's individual journey in life, right?
Yeah,
Potentially.
it definitely cuts deep and becomes relevant to what we experience every day.
In answer to the question, I think it's because the movie is still able to showcase these principles that these people of time had, and how those principles can go against even more important things, mm-hmm. or go against themselves.
Exactly.
So it teaches you so much, yet it shows you how it's completely backwards.
Because we grow up being taught certain principles and we don't even know why we do them, mm-hmm. right? Like, we don't even know why we follow through with some of the things that we do. And that's why I love that this goes to question those principles and like where it really matters.
And you see how delicate it is when you think you're standing for something that's right, and then you cross into evil, essentially, by doing very inhumane things to other people. As you see the crimes essentially committed that go seemingly unanswered, and I hope we get into that too, how these tragedies get swept under the rug.
That leads to my next question perfectly. The main character in Harakiri, Hanshiro Tsugumo, is a man who lost everything. And we later find out that his intentions of coming into the Lee clan was for vengeance. I want to bring this into connection with what's going on in today and what we've been seeing in the news, notably the shooting that happened in Maine that killed 18 people. I want to bring the shooter and Tsugumo into comparison because they're both men who lost, from what we know, lost everything. They both appeared to make a point, and they both ended up killing themselves in the end. I want to talk about what kind of revenge story Harakiri is compared to this man killing 18 people in Maine, USA.
There's so many parallels there, right? Like you mentioned, two men who seemingly lost everything. Yet, what was their intention? Both of them enter an institution. In Harakiri, he's entering this estate of a clan that stands for the Samurai Code. In Maine, we had the shooter who entered, from what I understand, a bowling alley and a bar where he met his ex-wife or ex-girlfriend who he was broken up about. The way the two go about their revenge and making their point is very different, though. The main difference being to choose violence. That's why one you can seemingly not understand, where the other you could applaud, and that should be obvious. In Harakiri, the protagonist's intentions was not to kill.
No, he had no intention of
You may
coming in to
think
kill.
that as you're watching the film, because there are scenes by the end especially where the violence breaks out, and I'm sure that's what a lot of people are waiting for when watching a samurai film, and unfortunately maybe that's what they end up taking away from it. His method of revenge was to tell his story. That was his main goal. Whether he knew he was going to die or not, or if there would be collateral damage with casualties.
Right, because he came in knowing he had nothing to lose.
First of all, you see that in this actor's performance. You really see a disheveled man with the sullen eyes, the lines in his face. He's gone through it. You see it. It's a remarkable performance. But the confidence that he goes in with and how he unravels his story is so captivating. Again, his main motivation was to tell a story, to prove to this clan that the Samurai Code, the atrocities that they committed following their code. And not to get off track too much, but even in the sequences of action where you have these two samurais dueling, and it's so epic. It's exactly what you want, from the real swords that they're using, from the elements of the wind perfectly captivating the movements of them, the samurai, and the camera motions, which I alluded to before, are so modern. He doesn't kill the other samurai.
No.
He does...
Even better.
He does even better. He breaks his sword, which has huge symbolic meaning in Japanese culture. The when your sword breaks, your katana, and he manages to slice his hair,
his ponytail,
his top knot off.
Yeah, which goes to show you his capabilities as well as a samurai. And I'm sure I think the film even pointed that out, was that it was more humiliating, instead of your head being cut off, to have your top knot be cut off, because you already know that he was capable of decapitating you.
Yeah.
But then to be able to slice off your top knot is even more skillful.
So much so that the opponent ends up killing himself. I love that he didn't resort to violence. He wasn't intending to be violent until they had no choice, because he proves his point by telling his story, and their answer isn't to apologize or admit to their wrongdoings. They call him a madman.
They become defensive.
And then they unleash on him. It's a very beautiful image of this yard that they're in, where he's on a white mat. Essentially, it's his stage to tell his story.
Yeah.
And surrounding him is the counselor and this clan of obedient followers who listen to his whole story like us, yet they're so trained, so coded to the samurai ways that they still choose, when they're commanded to unleash on him and kill him. And that's when there's quite a big battle sequence.
Well, and that's when the violence is forced upon.
In defense, he kills a few of these followers of the estate, and at one point he grabs the red armor in defense, very symbolic of the hollow. There's no man in the armor. The code of the samurai is very hollow and shallow.
It's empty.
It's an empty promise of virtue. He ends up discarding it on the ground, and it's almost a sense of mockery and disrespect for this code of samurai that he completely debunked. Getting back to current real life situation which happened, the tragedy in Maine, where you had this madman, and I don't know this man. You could only imagine his mental state, and whatever his reasonings were, there's obviously no sense in how he decided to go about things. He thought, I guess, that the more people he hurt, the louder his tragedy, his own tragedy would be.
Which is unfortunate, because he chose violence. And yet people notice that more.
All of North America was talking about this Maine shooter and the manhunt, and how many people now are dead, and it's all over the news. And what you're left with is just you feel completely empty, and of course it's tragic, but for what reason you can't understand. And what point did what was his proof? And it was nothing. But what's most impactful about Harakiri's, the story in the film, is how it concludes after the big fight. Is you see how the estate, this counselor, chooses to clean up, quite literally and metaphorically. They cover all their tracks. They pick up the armor, this hollow armor where it once stood, like it still uphold their code. And they, amongst each other, say, no one will hear of the truth here. We will say that we allowed these men to perform harakiri as they requested. The other casualties were of mere illness, and that's all ever people will know.
It concludes with the shot of the hollow shell of the samurai,
giving you a complete different perspective from what you came into. The whole meaning here is so relevant to not just Japan or that period of Japan, it's to life itself. You wonder how corrupt things really are, how these things you don't ever end up knowing or hearing of because the higher-ups conceal, they cover their tracks.
It will always be relevant when we have an authoritarian regime.
Right, and whatever side you stand on, even if you're indifferent, whether you could say a liberal or a Republican, a conservative, if anything is taken to an extreme, radical in nature, then it's gonna have negative repercussions. And this film beautifully showcases those repercussions in one man's story. When I say I love film and what I take away from films, yeah, there's some that are entertaining or that make you think of a particular sequence or you wonder how they did it, but this one is really, when we said perfect and timeless in what it's conveying in the message, it's why it's a cinematic achievement and a great piece of art. This is what you need to enrich your life with, and for it to do it in a normal runtime, right? It's not asking a lot of you.
And for those of you who have it in your Letterboxd watch list, this is your sign to go and watch this film. Because those who have had it in their watch list for a long time always regret not watching this movie sooner. So, go watch Harakiri. And with that, we will conclude our video. If you like what you see and you like our channel, please comment, like, share our video, follow us on other social media platforms. We have Instagram, Letterboxd, and TikTok.
Subscribe if you'd like to.
Our handle is @AshleyandAlex.
I got goosebumps just talking about this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Till next time.
You're awesome.